Welcome. Thank you for joining the U.S. Data Management Project Management Practice Best Series Practice webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's session. Gary Meek, USDM's Global Practice Lead, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, direction for post-webinar collaboration, and our discussion topic, taking the risk out of data and document migration for life sciences. We're proud to have Gary Meek presenting today. He is the Global Practice Lead for USDM's Project Management team, and Gary has over 25 years in program and project management experience, with more than 10 of those years in the life science domain. Gary has presented on project and change management to multiple forums and is a recognized leader in the field. He is a subject matter expert in program and project leadership, organizational change, strategic planning, and building teamwork. He's worked with small, medium, and large life sciences firms worldwide, and recently led cross-functional global project teams, including major organizational transformations and integrations. USDM is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing quality and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Santa Barbara, California, and we've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 200 life science clients. We offer hands-on experience assisting clients under regulatory distress, and we're the market leader for validation accelerator packs. Our various dedicated practices include IT and virtualization, quality and auditing, ECM, ERP, PLM, EQM, manufacturing, automation and equipment, clinical and drug safety, business intelligence, of course, project management, GRC, and our laboratory practice, which includes both systems and equipment. In addition, we do have subject matter experts on board to support compliance within the nutraceutical industry. The content today will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post questions for our team via the iLink message board, which you'll find on the lower left of your screen. Or you can join us for the discussion on LinkedIn and post any questions there. We're happy to address any confidential questions offline. Just shoot us a note at USDM.com. We appreciate your taking the time to join us today, and now I'll turn the presentation over to Gary.
Good morning. Quickly walk through the agenda here. We've obviously, when we're talking about something along the lines of data migration, it's a lot more than a 30-minute conversation, but the idea today is to walk you through a quick overview, do a little review of the process that I've used in the past that has proven to be successful. Some major areas to think about as you're starting a data migration or as you're starting the planning for a data migration. Some things, risks that we've run across. I've done a number of migrations, probably the last 7 or 8 years have been focused around big data migrations in the pharmaceutical industry. So just some things to look out for and how you might be able to mitigate those risks. And then kind of a life sciences approach to verification. How are we going to go about checking all of this data and all of these documents? Certainly if we're doing, for example, the last migration I did was something in the neighborhood of 1.5 million documents. Obviously, we're not going to go through and check all of those to make sure. So what are some quality and qualified approaches for going through and doing that? And then we'll wrap up and answer any questions that we can in whatever remaining time is available. So data migration, the process, right? So what we typically would do is we would start the process with some analysis up front, some pre-migration analysis using tools, using scripts, using something to start to validate the complexity of the data and the folder structure if you're doing documents. Where do we have missing information? Where do we have required information in the new system that is not in the old system? Or where do we have complexities like multiple sites or any of those kinds of things where we could start to create an analysis to see, where do we stand, how complex is this migration going to be, and start to work through that process. So as we start the planning process, we have some pretty good idea of what we're faced with. Then we do an initiation and planning stages. This is where, very important in this process is that we let everyone know what are the time expectations. Certainly on the business side, they have a full-time job. What are we looking for? How much time are we going to need? What's going to be the process? When at peak times, when are we going to need you? So this is an important stage to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we have the resources available to do the job. We then go to a scoping phase where we'd start to say, what are we moving? Are we moving everything? An example here is, are we moving audit trails? Some places move the audit trails. Some places just create new audit trails and archive the old. So again, we're kind of scoping. Are we bringing over all products at a time? Are we going to batch this? Just the whole concept around what are we going to do and what is actually part of this project, and importantly, what is not part of this project. Data mapping, pretty straightforward. Now we're starting to look at what's in the old system and where is it going in the new system. Then any data analysis and cleansing. Are we going to go back to the old system and clean it up before we move it? Are we going to move it as is? Again, just trying to get a good concept of what we're doing. Then we would develop whatever scripts or configure a tool to do the mapping across. So now we know what the mapping is. Now let's put it in the tool. Then we would start doing some dry runs. So we would start in kind of in a development environment, doing iterative dry runs with comparisons to make sure that we've got it correct. And so this is, as I said, this is an iterative process. We're running a small portion of the migration. We're doing some verification. We're updating the scripts. We're running another one, and we just iterate through this to the point of when we have a good set of scripts, and then we start, again, moving it kind of through a QA process into a validation process, and then into the ending production process. Data enrichment then becomes part of this as we go through. So data enrichment is where the business would go in and add data to data that's in the old system. So typically what we would do here is we would create a spreadsheet or an Access database or something along those lines where we take the data out of the old system, we put it out there, the business then can add additional data, and then we would take that and make that an additional source to the migration. And then finally we do the migration qualification. Again, as part of your planning process, you're going to have a plan in place of how we're going to qualify this, what sampling sizes are we going to use, are we using tools, how are we going to qualify them, how are we going to qualify the process, really just documenting and ensuring that what we had in the old system and what we were supposed to do as the migration process ended up in the new system. And then finally, the cutover. And again, this is done differently for every migration. There's really two ways of looking at it. There's a freeze where we say, okay, as of this time, we're not making any more changes to the old system. We're going to move it all over. There's a freeze in place where the business can't update any data. We're going to put this in the source system, in the target system, and then the updates would be done from there. So that's one option. Difficult because sometimes, especially when we were doing 1.5 million documents, that took 2 weeks, and the idea of the regulatory group not being able to do anything to their data put in any new submissions, anything like that was not a good one. So in that case, we chose what we called a delta migration. So basically, we moved everything over and then went back and did a second mini migration to grab everything that had changed or was missed during this migration period. So a few options. Again, this is part of the planning process, figuring out exactly how we want to go about doing this. Kind of moving on, we're going to take a look at some major areas to consider. We want to be able to reduce the risk here of the migration. I mean, that should be one of the number one criteria in your migration, making sure that the risk is recognized and minimized. So just areas to look at to do that, right? How many documents are we moving? That then drives how long will it take to physically move these things across. And if it's data, obviously goes faster than documents. How many metadata fields are we looking at? What's the complexity of the mappings? So are we doing any transformations? So are we doing any lookups? So an example would be in the old system, they did free-form product names. So they were just able to go in and hand key the product name, but now we want to make that consistent, and so we have a lookup table somewhere. So now the current data goes out to the lookup, figures out what the product is, does it match, does it not match, and then we'll get some errors out of that, obviously, that say we can't figure out what these are. So the complexity of the mappings, the transformations, am I moving things from a single field to two fields? So an example of that would be an address. So we may be in a situation where it's manually entered. They manually enter city, comma, state, space, zip code, and then we want to take that and move that into different fields called city and state and zip code. So just those types of things are things to look at. Are we doing data enrichment? Do we do any cleansing? Does the business have time to do the cleansing? Does the business have time to do the enrichment? One of the things that is a big gotcha for things that I've done in the past is coming from multiple sources, multiple sites, multiple migrations. So data being moved from an old system to a newer system, and then we have to take those three migrations and move it across. So the data typically is very incomplete, and it makes it very challenging. And then obviously the approach to verification. So if I have 1,000,005 documents, how many of these things am I going to have to go in and verify moved correctly? And then how am I going to go about doing that? What's the sampling size? Am I going to use an automated tool to do that? So those are kind of some of the big areas that expand your time frame, expand the scope of what you're trying to do. And if you don't do that upfront analysis and that upfront planning, these are areas where you start to see your timeline start to creep because, I didn't know that I didn't realize that this complexity was coming, or I didn't realize that I was going to migrate the audit trail, or I didn't realize that I was going to create an audit trail when I created the new records in the system. And this happens a lot of times when you get people who are not intimately familiar with the pharmaceutical industry, and they're great technicians, but they don't think in terms of I have to have an audit trail for that record. So those are kind of some key points. Again, I'm trying to keep this at a reasonably high level, reasonably quick to stay within the time frame. So some of the biggest business risks. So the first thing would be limited resource availability. So these are people who have full-time jobs, very similar to the any standard project that you're doing. They've got a full-time job, they have limited availability, and so upfront planning, putting together a plan, communicating your plan really helps to mitigate that. There are times when I've seen as much as 20% needed from the business at peak times, and that's a hard thing to do when they have other projects and then they also have a full-time job. Another big risk is the lack of understanding of the new system. A lot of times new systems get deployed, the The IT folks are very familiar with the system, but the business is not very familiar. And so it's very hard for them to understand, okay, what is this going to look like in my new system? I saw your mapping spreadsheet. That's wonderful, but I don't know how this thing is going to look when it actually gets to my system. So, involving the business, doing user acceptance testing with migrated data is critical to being able to mitigate this risk. Cutover planning, being able to understand the concepts, understanding the business, what's the possibility of freezing the information. Obviously, that's the easiest way to do it. Freeze the old system, move everything across, migrate it to the new system, bring the new system up, and it's a much simpler transition. If you try to do the Delta migration, which honestly is probably 90% of the projects that I've ever done, we've done a second Delta migration just because it's very difficult to freeze the system for the business. How are we going to go about doing that? It is critical, and planning that out and getting the business to understand what the impacts are to the business and what the risks are is critical. And then obviously rollback scenarios. So what happens if we're in the middle of this migration and and something goes wrong? So how do we roll this back? How do we stop in the middle of a migration? What's the go, no-go decision? Who's responsible for that go, no-go decision? Is it a technical decision, which it shouldn't be, or is it a business decision? But someone has to make that call. So those are the business risks. On the technical side, there's the delays in the deployment of the system. Particularly, I've seen it when you're doing any kind of custom development that gets delayed. We have plans of when we're going to cut over to the new system, what the migration is going to look like. We've communicated that out to the various stakeholders and even beyond that to the extended business team. And so this becomes obviously a huge risk to the project. It's standard. It's the dependencies of everything else. It's really just communicating at the portfolio level and communicating at the program level of what's going on and how we're addressing this. Resource availability, same thing on the IT side as the business side. Typically, though, the IT folks are more dedicated to the project, even sometimes fully dedicated to the project, and so, but they still get called in to work on other projects or consult on other projects. So again, the resource availability, which I think on any project I've ever done, that's been the one common risk across everything. Dependencies with other projects, so resources getting pulled on higher priority projects. At the portfolio level, so now we're talking about at a more global level, and resources getting moved and adjusted and getting pulled away from your project causes delays, and that's pretty straightforward. I think you get the point. And then lack of clarity of the business rules. So typically, what I see is IT folks that are very good at IT and business folks that are very good at the business and have domain knowledge, but it's that liaison between the two, the translation between the two that really can be challenging. So making sure that the folks doing the migration and the folks doing the mapping and the folks doing the technical side understand the business rules. So what am I doing with this data? What does it mean? Just structuring it properly and getting a thorough understanding of what am I supposed to do with this from a technical perspective is very challenging, but is critical to making sure the data gets to the right spot and looking the right way. Quality risks. The quality of the data as it comes in. There's a number of these. again, I'm trying to keep it as short as I could, but the inconsistency from multiple sites. So in today's world, we have mergers and acquisitions and continued acquisitions, and so we get maybe even a situation where obviously it could be different systems, but even when I've seen the same system, people coming from the same system, they still don't use the system the same way. They still don't have the same requirements around their data. They still don't have the same business rules because they were a different company or a different site. And then trying to bring all of those things together really creates complexity and really creates risk to your project. Because a lot of times it's something that's not seen. I've seen people doing due diligence on mergers or acquisitions. They do their due diligence and they say, oh, well, they have the same accounting system as we have. So that should be a very simple transition. And then, when they get down to really analyzing the data, it's completely different. They use it a different way. It becomes looks simple and typically is not. So, the data inconsistency from multiple sites is really a key one here. Previous migrations, poor quality data. Obviously, as time goes on, systems get better typically. The older systems don't have the same requirements. They don't have the same required fields. They don't have the same rigor and structure around how we're going to follow the process to get the data into the system. And so consequently, as we move that from system to system to system, by the time we get to our current system, the data quality is typically very poor. So how am I going to overcome that? And again, it's communication with the business, it's understanding the business and helping guide them into moving that data, ensuring its accuracy. And this is where we see a lot of the data enrichment happening, because quite honestly, that's typically simpler than going back and cleaning up the old data in the old system. It's much easier to just push it out, put it in a spreadsheet, put it in an Access database, give the business access to it, and have them go through and update that information. Taking the time to ensure quality. Again, never been on a project that didn't have a deadline, didn't have I have to have this by June 30th. Start planning backwards to tell me when I should get started, and it should have started 3 months ago. So you have the deadlines, you have these the lack of clarity around what the data is going to look like, and then you end up having a challenge to try to make the timeline. But I've done a number of these things where people have said, the timeline is all that matters, just put the data in, we'll go in and clean it up afterwards, and let's not worry about it. And typically what happens is they don't go in and clean it up. They don't have time to go in and clean it up. So you're left with bad data across the board, which gives you business challenges and lack of credibility around the system. So it's one of those things where, taking the time to make sure that you've planned, making sure that you're ensuring quality is important. Going back to the previous migrations thing, that's why a lot of times we see the bad data is they took the same approach. We don't have time for that right now. Let's push it in. We'll clean up the data, and then you get to your next migration of your new system 5 years later, and nothing's been done to clean up the data. So that's a real critical thing. Again, bad data. The folks using this system will start to lose confidence in the system and lose confidence in its ability to deliver the data that they need. And then obviously the approach to verification. How are we going to verify all of these things that are moving over? Huge risk. That's why the upfront planning, the upfront agreement on how we're going to do this, and running it through the entire organization as to how we're going to do this and making sure that quality is on board is critical to the success. So Last but not least, just a quick blurb on the life sciences approach to verification. So there's a number of standards that can be used. I've seen, square root of the total batch size plus 1 used. There's the military standard. There's ANSI standards that have tables to decide how many. What is our sampling size? How many of these records should we verify to ensure or to give us the confidence that our migration was correct. One of the things that I can talk about here is, make sure if you're doing these types of migrations that you're not just picking, while you're doing your dry runs, you're not just picking a given product or given whatever your classification might be. Make sure that you get a good cross-section because, again, these things have been treated differently over time. And while one product may be very clean and you're doing your dry run and you get to the end and you say that looks really good, once you start to expand that across all of the products, you start to find little nuances that create the issues for you. So, and then the last bullet is really, there are automated ways of doing the verification where you would be doing, you better able to do 100% verification. So we're comparing everything across the board, all of the documents that we moved, all of the data that we moved, and really use these automated tools to go in and do the manual labor of verification. And then, we just validate the tool, we validate the process, and that's how we would get to the 100% verification, make sure everything moved and moved correctly. And in this case, we would be comparing the original source to the target and making sure that it's correct. We'd come up with a number of anomalies maybe, but there would be some expectation that we would have some based on the transformations and the interim data enrichment. So I know that was very quick, a lot of stuff to get through, a lot of information to get through in a short period in time. So at this point, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you, Gary. We appreciate you sharing. It's really great information there, and lots more to tackle as well. As Gary mentioned, we'll open the floor to questions now, and while you're typing those in, I would like to remind you that the webinar has been recorded and will be available on our website, which is USDM.com. You can also check out the site for previously recorded sessions, which are solid topics across the various practice areas that USDM supports. And do stay tuned for upcoming webinars. We will put the schedule out there on the website as well. Let's see, we'll start with our first question. It's from Sheila. What would be the process for qualifying the automated tool?
Yeah, so along these lines, typically what we do is we qualify, obviously we have an IQ installation qualification. We would have some OQ scripts to make sure that it is functioning correctly. So that would be the primary way of doing it. And then we would, to ensure that it's working correctly from a process perspective, we would validate the process. So we would run this across as part of the validation. We would validate the tool that we're using to migrate, but we would also validate the tool that we're using for comparison.
Thank you, Gary. Next question is from John. Is data enrichment a normal part of the process?
I would say it's probably not normal, but it should be. Again, I think typically what happens is people do a migration, they're under the timeline, they move the data, they get it over there, and they're basically just trying to meet a minimum threshold. And then 3 months, 6 months after they do the migration, they have some regrets in the fact that their data is not complete and it's missing information, and they really don't have the time to go back and fix it.
Yeah, not good. Okay, very good. Looks like a next question. Manira, what are the automated tools you have used in the past for verification of data migration?
Go ahead.
Oh, I just correcting myself. It was data migrated, not migration.
Okay. So, yeah, I've used one primary tool. It is from one of our partners that goes through and actually does the verification source to target based on the mappings. It's a solid tool. Like I said, it does 100% of the verification. If you'd like more information, I'd be happy to send that out to you on exactly the tool and how it's used, and maybe even schedule a demo for you to see the tool.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, anything that you're needing in follow-up or questions, or you have an afterthought or not sure, please just contact us and let us know if we can point you in the right direction. We're happy to do that. Thanks to those of you who are posting compliments and thanks here on our chat link. We do appreciate that. And looks like we'll wrap up now. We do invite you to join our discussion out on LinkedIn, and we would welcome your insight and your feedback, and certainly your suggestions for future topics. If there's something that you're struggling with or you just need some insight or direction, we're happy to help there. If you did enjoy today's presentation, let us know by clicking the like button, which is on our USDM LinkedIn group page, or even better, post a compliment there or a comment. The feedback, again, helps us to know that we're on target with continuing to fund the complimentary series. So let us know your thoughts there. Thank you, Gary, again, for presenting today, and thank you all for taking the time to join us. On behalf of the USDM team, we appreciate the opportunity to team with you towards excellence and compliance. Have a great day.